They said I was unqualified until I took over their surgical department. If you've ever been underestimated, judged before anyone saw what you could truly do, then this story is for you. So before we begin, subscribe, like the story, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened to Dr. Elena Carter inside the walls of St. Victoria Medical Center would become the kind of professional revenge no one in that hospital would ever forget. The first time Elena walked through the glass doors of the elite hospital, she felt the weight of every eye on her. St. Victoria was the kind of place where reputations mattered more than resumes and where legacy families in medicine treated the hospital like inherited property. Elena adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer, held her leather folder tighter, and reminded herself that she belonged there. She had graduated top of her class, completed one of the most competitive trauma fellowships in the country, and built a reputation for surgical excellence in emergency medicine. Her credentials were stronger than many surgeons twice her age. But the moment she entered the boardroom for her interview, the atmosphere shifted. At the far end of the polished table sat Dr. Richard Holloway, head of surgery, a man whose ego entered rooms before he did. Beside him were Dr. Vanessa Clark, senior attending surgeon, and board chair Dr. Thomas Whitmore. Holloway looked Elena up and down, not with curiosity, but with dismissal. "Dr. Carter," he said, leaning back in his chair, "your resume is ambitious." Elena smiled politely. "It reflects my work, sir." Holloway's lips curled. "That remains to be seen." The interview began like any other, questions about procedure, leadership, crisis management. Elena answered each one with calm precision, detailing her experience handling trauma under pressure, discussing innovations she introduced at her previous hospital, and outlining her vision for improving surgical efficiency. Whitmore nodded several times. Even Vanessa seemed impressed. But Holloway never stopped smirking. Then came the question that changed everything. "Tell me," Holloway said, folding his hands, "how does someone your age expect to manage a surgical department at a hospital like this?" Elena met his eyes. "By doing what I've done my entire career, delivering results." A quiet tension settled in the room. Holloway laughed. Actually laughed. "Results," he said. "Dr. Carter, this isn't some regional clinic. This is St. Victoria. We don't hand leadership roles to people with polished resumes and confidence." Elena's jaw tightened. "Then perhaps you should judge me by my outcomes, not my age." Vanessa looked down to hide a smile. Whitmore cleared his throat. But Holloway leaned forward, voice sharpened. "Let me be direct. Some of us have concerns about your credentials." Elena blinked. "My credentials? Impressive on paper," Holloway said, "but papers can say anything. Elite fellowships. Publications. Awards. Sometimes people look better in documents than they do in real operating rooms." The accusation hit like a slap. Elena felt every person in that room go still. He wasn't questioning her experience. He was questioning whether she had earned it. "Are you implying my credentials are false?" she asked. Holloway shrugged. "I'm saying qualifications don't always equal competence." Elena sat straighter. "Then test my competence." The room went silent. Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Put me in an operating room," Elena said. "Give me any procedure. Any complication. Any emergency. Test my skill if that's what this is really about." For a moment, even Whitmore looked intrigued. But Holloway simply stood. "That won't be necessary. We've made our decision." Elena's stomach dropped. "You rejecting my application?" Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. Holloway buttoned his suit jacket. "We need someone with a more established presence." Elena understood exactly what he meant. Someone older. Someone from their circle. Someone they already respected. Not an outsider. Not her. As she gathered her folder, Holloway delivered the final insult. "You may be talented somewhere, Dr. Carter. But here? You're unqualified for this level." Those words followed her all the way out of the hospital. Unqualified. The word burned in her mind for days. It would have broken most people. It nearly broke her. But Elena Carter had not built her career by accepting defeat. 3 weeks later, fate opened a door no one expected. St. Victoria's trauma division suffered a staffing emergency after 2 surgeons resigned during an internal dispute. Suddenly desperate, the same hospital that had rejected Elena called with a temporary offer, 6-month contract, trauma attending, no leadership, no authority, no prestige. A lower position than she deserved. Her best friend told her to refuse. After what they did? Absolutely not. But Elena smiled slowly as she stared at the contract. No, she said. I'm taking it. Why? Her friend asked. Elena signed her name. Because the best revenge is letting people watch you become indispensable. On her first day, whispers followed her through the surgical wing. That's her. The one who applied for director. Too young. Too polished. Heard her credentials were exaggerated. Elena heard every word. She ignored all of them. Then came her first case. A multi-vehicle collision flooded the ER with trauma patients. Panic spread. Nurses rushed. Residents froze. A young man arrived with internal bleeding, collapsed lung, and dropping vitals. The assigned attending surgeon hesitated. Elena stepped forward instantly. Prep OR2. Now. The attending glared. You don't give orders here. Elena looked at the monitor. Then watch him die while protecting your ego. Silence. Then movement. Within minutes Elena was in the operating room, hands steady, voice calm, commanding the chaos like she had done it 1,000 times before. Nurses snapped to attention. Residents followed every instruction. She moved with flawless precision, stopping hemorrhage, repairing damage, stabilizing the lung. 48 minutes later, she walked out of surgery with blood on her gloves and the patient alive. The hallway was silent. Nurses stared. Residents whispered. One of them finally said, "That was unbelievable." Elena removed her gloves. "Update the family," she said. Across the corridor, Dr. Holloway stood watching. His face was unreadable. For the first time since their interview, he said nothing. Elena met his gaze for one long second before walking past him. That night, word spread through every floor of St. Victoria Medical Center. The underestimated doctor. The one they called unqualified. The one whose credentials they doubted. The one who had just outperformed half the surgical department in her very first shift. And as Elena stood alone in the hospital parking garage, staring at the city lights beyond the concrete walls, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "Be careful. They don't like being proven wrong." Elena smiled and slipped the phone into her pocket. "Good," she whispered. "Neither do I." And that was the night St. Victoria Medical Center learned their biggest mistake was not rejecting Dr. Elena Carter, it was letting her inside. The morning after Dr. Elena Carter saved her first trauma patient at St. Victoria Medical Center, the hospital felt different. People still whispered when she passed, but now the whispers carried something new, respect mixed with fear. Nurses who had ignored her suddenly greeted her. Residents straightened when she entered a room. Even the staff who had mocked her doubted credentials the week before now watched her with cautious eyes. But Elena knew better than to believe one successful surgery had changed everything. In hospitals like St. Victoria, talent earned attention, but power was protected by politics. And the people threatened by her surgical excellence were not the kind who stepped aside quietly. By noon, she was summoned to Dr. Richard Holloway's office. He didn't ask her to sit. "You embarrassed one of my attending surgeons yesterday," he said coldly. Elena kept her face calm. "I saved a patient." Holloway folded his arms. "You overstepped protocol." Protocol was hesitation while a man bled out. His jaw tightened. You do not get to rewrite chain of command because you think you're smarter than everyone here. Elena held his stare. No. I rewrite outcomes. For one sharp second, his face darkened. Then Holloway leaned in and smiled, a smile without warmth. Be careful, Dr. Carter. Talent gets attention. Arrogance gets destroyed. Elena left his office understanding one thing clearly. She was no longer merely unwelcome. She was now a threat. The retaliation began immediately. Her schedule was changed without notice. She was assigned impossible back-to-back trauma shifts while favored surgeons got lighter rotations. Critical surgical cases were diverted away from her. Her requests for advanced equipment were delayed. Nurses loyal to Holloway suddenly forgot her updates. Residents assigned to her were pulled at the last minute. Every move was designed to frustrate her, isolate her, and push her into failure. Hospital politics had become open warfare. Yet Elena refused to crack. She worked every shift without complaint. She stayed later than anyone. She reviewed charts twice. She taught younger residents during breaks. She treated janitors and board members with the same respect. Slowly, quietly, people began choosing sides. It started with the nurses. They trusted her because she listened. Then the residents. They admired her because she taught instead of humiliating them. Then came the patients, requesting her by name whenever possible. Her reputation grew faster than Holloway could contain it. Within 3 weeks, Elena had become the most talked about doctor in the trauma wing. And that was exactly when the sabotage turned personal. One Friday evening, she entered operating room 3 for a high-risk emergency splenectomy on a teenage patient from a motorcycle crash. Time was critical. Blood pressure dropping. Internal bleeding severe. Elena scrubbed in, stepped to the table, and froze. Her preferred surgical instruments were missing. Replaced with incomplete backup trays. She turned sharply. Who signed off this setup? The nurse looked confused. This is what Central Supply sent. Elena scanned the room. Half the tools she needed for the procedure were gone. Delayed. Misplaced. Or removed. Deliberately. Someone wanted her to fail in surgery. But panic was a luxury she could not afford. Fine, she said. We do it with what we have. The residents looked uncertain. Doctor, you sure? Elena snapped on her gloves. The patient doesn't have time for perfect conditions. What followed became legend inside St. Victoria. Using incomplete tools, adapting in real time, Elena performed one of the cleanest emergency trauma surgeries the residents had ever witnessed. Every movement was precise. Every decision immediate. She improvised techniques on the fly without losing control for even a second. The patient survived. The room stood silent afterward. One resident whispered, "How did you even do that?" Elena peeled off her gloves. You stop waiting for ideal conditions and learn to win anyway. But when she exited the OR, she found Dr. Vanessa Clark waiting in the hallway. Arms folded. Expression unreadable. They are trying to break you, Vanessa said quietly. Elena narrowed her eyes. You're telling me this why? Vanessa glanced around before stepping closer. Because I know how Holloway operates. He did the same thing to me 10 years ago when I challenged him. Elena studied her. Then why stay loyal to him? Vanessa's smile was bitter. Because I learned survival before courage. Then she leaned in. Listen carefully. Holloway never intended for you to stay temporary. He's setting you up for formal review. One mistake, one complaint, one failed surgery. And he'll have grounds to terminate your contract. Elena's expression hardened. Thank you for the warning. Vanessa nodded once and walked away. That night Elena sat alone in her office reviewing every strange event of the past month. Missing instruments. Altered schedules. Misplaced reports. Delayed consults. It was too coordinated to be random. Someone was engineering failure. But instead of fear, she felt clarity. They were not attacking her because she was weak. They were attacking because she was becoming impossible to ignore. The next week, St. Victoria announced a major board evaluation of the surgical department. Hospital executives and outside consultants would observe performance metrics, leadership efficiency, and emergency response systems. The rumors spread instantly. If the department underperformed, restructuring would follow. Holloway's position as head of surgery, once untouchable, might suddenly be vulnerable. Elena understood the moment the announcement was made why the pressure had intensified. This was bigger than ego now. Holloway wasn't just protecting pride. He was protecting power. And then came the twist no one expected. 2 days before the board review, the hospital's most senior trauma surgeon suffered a heart attack and was rushed into ICU. His absence left a major leadership gap in the trauma division during the most important week of the hospital's year. That morning, the board demanded interim supervisory coverage. Holloway recommended Vanessa Clark. But Vanessa shocked everyone. No, she said calmly in front of the board. The best qualified surgeon for that responsibility is Dr. Elena Carter. The room went silent. Holloway's face turned white with rage. Absolutely not, he snapped. She's temporary staff. Vanessa didn't blink. Temporary staff who currently has the best surgical outcomes in the department. Another board member added, her patient reviews are also the highest. Holloway sputtered, but the data was undeniable. By unanimous emergency vote, Elena was appointed interim trauma lead for the board review period. Not director. Not yet. But leadership. Public leadership. Official authority. Elena accepted the badge with steady hands while Holloway stared at her like a man watching his house burn. As she pinned the interim leadership credential to her coat, she understood the truth. The wall protecting him had cracked. And for the first time since entering St. Victoria Medical Center, Elena Carter was no longer fighting merely to survive their system. She now had a foothold inside it. But as she turned toward the trauma floor, phone vibrating again with another unknown message, her eyes narrowed at the words on the screen, congratulations. Now they'll come for you harder. Elena slipped the phone away and kept walking. Let them, she said. Because if they thought doubting her credentials had been their mistake, promoting her, even temporarily, was about to become their downfall. Dr. Elena Carter had barely worn the interim trauma lead badge for 12 hours before the resistance turned vicious. By sunrise, half the surgical department was whispering that her promotion was political, undeserved, temporary, a publicity move for the board review. Others said Holloway would remove her before the week ended. Elena heard every rumor and answered none of them. She had not fought through years of being underestimated to defend herself with words. She would let results speak again. The board review began that Monday, and the pressure inside St. Victoria Medical Center was unlike anything most of the staff had ever seen. Executives in tailored suits lined the observation galleries. Outside consultants shadowed departments with clipboards. Every delayed response, every communication error, every failed protocol was documented. For Holloway, the stakes were personal. If the surgical department underperformed, his future as head of surgery could collapse. And Elena knew one thing with certainty, he would rather destroy the department than let her shine. Her first major test came before noon. A mass casualty alert blared across the hospital. A private bus carrying students had collided with a fuel truck on the highway. Within minutes, ambulances flooded the emergency bay. Burn victims. Crush injuries. Internal bleeding. Airway trauma. Total chaos. Nurses sprinted. Residents panicked. Families screamed in waiting areas. One junior attending froze in place the moment he saw the volume of patients. Elena stepped into the center of the storm like she had been built for it. Listen up, she shouted, voice cutting through the noise. Every head turned. Red tags to OR 1 through 4. Burns to ICU prep. Chest trauma to me. Orthopedics takes fractures. Move. The entire floor snapped into motion. Even senior staff obeyed without argument. From the observation gallery above, the board watched everything. Elena moved from bed to bed with perfect command, triaging patients, assigning surgeons, stabilizing critical injuries, making impossible decisions in seconds. Her leadership was surgical excellence under pressure. Precise. Fast. Ruthless when necessary. But then disaster struck inside the disaster. Operating Room 2 lost power mid-procedure. Backup systems failed. Monitors went black. Ventilator alarms screamed. Staff shouted in panic. Generator isn't switching, a nurse yelled. Elena spun toward the control panel. Manual ventilation now. She rushed into the OR, finding a patient open on the table and a terrified resident frozen beside him. Move, she ordered. Taking over instantly, Elena coordinated manual support while barking orders for portable equipment. Then her eyes narrowed. This was not random. Backup systems at St. Victoria were tested weekly. Simultaneous generator failure during board review was nearly impossible. Someone had sabotaged the power. But there was no time to prove it. The patient's pressure was crashing. Elena operated under emergency lighting, sweat on her brow, blood on her gloves, while nurses held portable lamps above the table. For 40 brutal minutes she worked in near darkness, adapting every move under impossible conditions. When the patient stabilized, even the hardened anesthesiologist stared at her in disbelief. That, he whispered, was unreal. Elena stripped off her gloves and turned to security. Lockdown engineering. Now. I want every maintenance log from the past month. Across the gallery above, Holloway quietly stepped away before anyone noticed him leave. By evening, St. Victoria had survived the mass casualty event with an extraordinary save rate. Consultants praised the trauma response as one of the most efficient emergency leadership performances they had ever witnessed. The board members were openly impressed. Elena should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt certain. The power outage had not been an accident. Someone had risked lives to make her fail. And she knew exactly who had motive. That night, while reviewing engineering reports in her office, Vanessa Clark entered without knocking. Her face was pale. You need to see this, she said, handing Elena a folder. Inside were maintenance override logs from the generator room. Manual tampering. Access credentials used to disable automated backup systems. Elena's stomach tightened. Whose login? Vanessa met her eyes. It routes through an admin override code assigned directly to Richard Holloway. Silence filled the room. Elena stared at the evidence, pulse hammering. If true, Holloway had sabotaged hospital infrastructure during active surgery. He had crossed from corruption into criminality. Why give me this? Elena asked. Vanessa exhaled shakily. Because I stayed silent too long. Because if he's willing to let patients die to destroy you, then none of us are safe. Elena closed the folder. Then tomorrow we take it to the board. Vanessa hesitated. Be careful. Holloway has allies. Elena's gaze sharpened. Then they can fall with him. But Holloway struck first. The next morning, before Elena could act, she was summoned to an emergency board hearing. She entered to find every senior executive seated around the long polished table. Holloway stood at the front, calm and composed. Too calm. He turned dramatically as she entered. Dr. Carter, he said, thank you for joining us. Whitmore's expression was grave. We've received serious allegations regarding your conduct during yesterday's emergency. Elena went still. Holloway handed the board a packet. Multiple complaints state Dr. Carter exceeded authority, endangered patients by bypassing protocol, and created unnecessary risk through reckless decision-making during the bus incident. Elena's eyes narrowed. Fabricated witness statements. Altered incident reports. Coordinated accusations. Holloway was framing her before she could expose him. "That's false," Elena said sharply. Holloway tilted his head. "Is it?" Because several attendings seemed to disagree. He smiled faintly. Perhaps leadership pressure revealed inexperience after all. The board looked uncertain. Doubt spread around the room. Holloway had moved fast, faster than she expected. Then the doors opened. One by one, people entered. First a trauma nurse. Then another. Then residents. Then anesthesiologists. Then emergency staff. More than 20 hospital employees walked into the boardroom and lined the walls. Whitmore stared. "What is this?" The first nurse stepped forward. "We're here to correct the record." Another resident spoke. "Dr. Carter saved lives yesterday." Then another. "She held the trauma unit together." Another. "Without her, people would have died." Then Vanessa entered last, carrying the maintenance logs. She placed them before the board. "And if we're discussing misconduct," she said coldly, "perhaps we should discuss who sabotaged the generators." Holloway's face drained of color. The room erupted. Board members grabbed the logs. Executives shouted questions. Whitmore stood abruptly. "Security, do not let anyone leave this room." Holloway looked around wildly, the arrogance finally gone. For the first time, Richard Holloway looked afraid. Elena stood silent while his empire cracked in real time. Every lie. Every sabotage. Every abuse of power. All unraveling at once. And as the board began demanding answers, Elena realized the truth: this was no longer about proving she belonged. It was about deciding who would control the future of St. Victoria Medical Center. Because by the time this meeting ended, someone would lose everything. And for Richard Holloway, the fall had only just begun. The boardroom exploded into chaos the moment the maintenance logs hit the table. Executives shouted over one another, legal counsel was called in, and security officers moved to stand behind Dr. Richard Holloway as if they already knew where this was heading. For years he had ruled St. Victoria Medical Center like his private kingdom, untouchable, feared, protected by loyalty and intimidation. But now the empire built on hospital politics and silence was collapsing in front of everyone. Holloway tried to speak, but his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. "This is absurd. Those records could have been altered." Vanessa Clark stepped forward immediately. "They were pulled directly from engineering's secured archive." Another board member added, "time-stamped and verified." Holloway's face hardened. He turned toward Elena with pure hatred. "You orchestrated this." Elena held his gaze without blinking. "No. You did." The board chair, Thomas Whitmore, slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. Dr. Holloway, pending full investigation, you are suspended immediately from all surgical and administrative duties." The room went dead silent. No one in the history of St. Victoria had ever seen Richard Holloway stripped of authority. Security stepped beside him. For one long moment, he stared at Elena with the kind of rage only broken pride creates. Then he leaned toward her and whispered so only she could hear, "This isn't over." Elena answered in a calm voice. "For you, it is." He was escorted out of the boardroom, and with him went the fear that had controlled the surgical department for years. But victory did not bring peace. It brought a vacuum. Within hours of Holloway's suspension, panic spread across the hospital. Senior surgeons who had depended on his favor no longer knew who was in charge. Department heads argued over chain of command. Consultants demanded leadership answers during the still active board review. Emergency surgeries were stacking up. The hospital needed immediate control, and every eye turned to the one person who had held everything together in the middle of disaster. Elena. That afternoon the board appointed her acting head of surgery until the investigation concluded. The announcement hit the hospital like thunder. The same staff who had whispered she was unqualified now watched her walk through the department with executive authority clipped to her coat. The underestimated doctor had become the person every surgeon now reported to. Yet Elena understood something others did not: title alone meant nothing. Power was not the badge. Power was what you did with it. She spent her first day in charge moving faster than anyone expected. She restructured trauma rotations. Reassigned weak attendings away from critical emergency leadership. Repaired communication failures between ER and surgical teams. Ordered independent reviews of delayed cases. Reopened complaints Holloway had buried for years. Within 48 hours, efficiency improved across the department. For the first time in years, the surgical floor ran on competence instead of favoritism. Staff morale changed almost overnight. Nurses smiled more. Residents asked questions without fear of humiliation. Junior doctors who had once stayed silent began offering ideas. Elena was not just managing the department, she was rebuilding its culture. But success created new enemies. Not everyone welcomed the power shift. Some senior surgeons resented taking orders from the woman they had mocked weeks earlier. Others feared what more audits might uncover. Then the backlash came. Anonymous complaints were filed against Elena. Rumors spread that she was using the Holloway scandal to stage a career comeback. A local medical blogger published a piece suggesting the hospital's new golden surgeon had manipulated board politics to seize control. The attacks were coordinated. Someone was trying to stain her reputation before the permanent surgical director vote. Elena read every accusation in silence, then returned to work. She would not defend herself through gossip. She would answer with results. Then came the hardest test yet. Late Friday night, just as the hospital prepared for a rare quiet evening, an emergency helicopter landed on the roof carrying a billionaire investor and major hospital donor who had suffered catastrophic internal injuries in a yacht accident. Multiple organ trauma. Severe blood loss. Minutes to live. The board flooded the hospital within minutes. Media gathered outside. The patient's family demanded the best surgical team immediately. But the most experienced cardiothoracic surgeon was out of state. Another specialist was unreachable. The room filled with panic. One board member grabbed Elena's arm. "Can you do this?" She looked at the scans. The surgery would require combining trauma, vascular, and thoracic expertise under impossible time pressure. A procedure many surgeons would refuse. Elena's answer came without hesitation. "Prep the OR." The operating room became a battlefield. Hours passed. Staff rotated from exhaustion. The donor coded twice on the table. Blood soaked through layers of gowns. Machines screamed. Residents stood frozen in awe as Elena performed at a level none of them had ever seen, making impossible decisions in seconds, controlling complications before others even recognized them, moving with surgical excellence so precise it felt unreal. At 3:14 a.m., she placed the final suture. The patient stabilized. Alive. The room stood in silence. One exhausted nurse whispered, "She just did the impossible." Word spread through the hospital before sunrise. Elena Carter had saved the hospital's most important patient in the most difficult surgery of the year. By morning, board members who had once questioned her credentials were openly calling her the future of St. Victoria. 3 days later, the board convened for the final vote. Every senior physician, executive, and department head attended. Elena stood at the end of the long boardroom table wearing the same calm expression she had worn the day they first doubted her credentials. Whitmore cleared his throat. Following review of leadership performance, surgical outcomes, board evaluations, and departmental restructuring, he paused. The room held its breath. The board unanimously appoints Dr. Elena Carter as permanent surgical director of St. Victoria Medical Center. Applause erupted across the room. Some sincere. Some forced. Elena accepted the appointment in silence while those who once dismissed her now stood to honor her. Then she looked across the room and saw the faces of the surgeons who had laughed when she first arrived. The residents who once whispered. The executives who had doubted her. every one of them now answering to her. And in that moment, Elena understood the beauty of real revenge, not humiliation. Not shouting. Not anger. Just undeniable success so complete that your enemies are forced to live beneath it. As she stepped into her new office that evening, the nameplate on the door had already been changed. Dr. Elena Carter. Surgical Director. She ran her fingers over the letters once, then smiled faintly. But before she could sit down, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just 5 words appeared on the screen: "You won't keep it long." Elena stared at the message. Then she slowly smiled. Because someone still thought this story was over. They were wrong. Becoming surgical director was not the end of the war. It was only the beginning of her reign. Dr. Elena Carter should have felt triumphant the day she became surgical director of St. Victoria Medical Center. She had done what no one thought possible, risen from the doctor they called unqualified to the woman running the entire surgical department. Her doubted credentials were no longer questioned. Her surgical excellence had become legend inside the hospital. Her professional revenge was complete. Or at least, that was what everyone thought. Because power does not end conflict, it reveals who can no longer hide their ambition. The anonymous message on her phone stayed in Elena's mind for days: "You won't keep it long." Most people would have dismissed it as bitterness from a defeated rival. Elena did not. She had learned that hospital politics never truly ended. They only changed shape. So while the staff celebrated her promotion, she watched. She listened. And she waited. It did not take long for the next attack to come. 3 weeks into her role as surgical director, the hospital's internal finance office discovered a series of irregular surgical supply purchases approved under Elena's executive code, purchases totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. Equipment she had never ordered. Contracts she had never signed. Budget reallocations she had never authorized. By noon, board members were demanding answers. By evening, rumors spread that the new director was corrupt. Elena sat in the conference room staring at the reports while executives questioned her integrity. "Did you authorize these expenditures?" Whitmore asked gravely. "No," Elena said. "Then someone used your credentials." She leaned back slowly. "Or someone wants it to look that way." The board launched an immediate audit. Pending review, Elena's spending authority was frozen. Her enemies had chosen their move carefully. They could not challenge her skill. They could not challenge her leadership. So they attacked the only thing left, her credibility. But Elena Carter had not survived sabotage, betrayal, and institutional warfare to be undone by forged paperwork. She requested full access to every financial system log. Every login trace. Every security recording. Every signature chain. Then she worked through the night herself. At 2:17 a.m., she found it. A repeated access point through an administrator override terminal, one only 3 people in the hospital could legally use. One was Whitmore. One was the CFO. The third made Elena's blood run cold. Dr. Ethan Mercer. Deputy Director of Surgery. The quiet senior surgeon who had smiled politely since her promotion. The man everyone considered neutral. Invisible. Safe. She stared at the screen in disbelief as the pattern became clear. Mercer had remained silent while Holloway fell. He had never defended Elena, but never attacked her openly either. He had simply waited. Let others destroy each other. Then moved when the throne was vulnerable. He had planned to let Elena rise, only to destroy her and take the position himself. The next morning Elena called for a full department leadership meeting. Every attending surgeon, board member, and administrator packed into the surgical conference hall. Mercer sat calmly near the front, expression unreadable. Elena stepped to the podium with a file in hand. "Thank you all for coming," she said evenly. "Today I'd like to address the allegations regarding financial misconduct." The room went silent. Mercer folded his hands. Elena clicked the projector remote. financial logs appeared on screen. After review, the fraudulent purchases were traced to administrative override access through deputy director credentials. Murmurs spread. Mercer's face tightened slightly. Elena clicked again. Security footage appeared, Mercer entering the terminal room after hours. Then again. Then again. The room erupted. Whitmore stood abruptly. "Dr. Mercer, explain yourself." Mercer rose slowly, abandoning pretense. "Fine," he snapped. "Yes, I did it." Gasps filled the room. His voice sharpened with years of bitterness. "Because she didn't earn this. She walked in here and took everything people spent decades building. She humiliated Holloway, replaced leadership, and turned this department upside down." Elena stepped closer. "No, Ethan. I exposed incompetence. There's a difference." His face twisted. "You think one miracle run makes you better than us?" Elena's voice remained calm. "No. Consistent excellence does." Security moved in. Mercer pointed at her with shaking rage. "This place will destroy you too. You think they love you now? They loved Holloway once." Elena's expression never changed. "Then I'll keep giving them results until they have no choice." He was escorted out while the room watched in stunned silence. Another rival gone. Another threat removed. But this time, something had changed. No one whispered when Elena walked out. No one questioned her anymore. No one looked at her as the outsider. Because the truth had become undeniable, she was the strongest leader that hospital had seen in years. Over the months that followed, Elena transformed St. Victoria Medical Center completely. She introduced merit-based promotions, expanded trauma training, modernized surgical protocols, reduced mortality rates across the department. Recruitment applications tripled. National medical journals praised the hospital's turnaround. Her leadership triumph became the standard by which others were judged. Then one morning, nearly a year after the day they first called her unqualified, Elena stood in the same boardroom where Richard Holloway had laughed in her face. This time the board chair smiled as he handed her a report. "Congratulations, Dr. Carter. Under your leadership, St. Victoria has been ranked the top surgical department in the region." Applause filled the room. Elena accepted the report quietly. Then her eyes drifted to the empty chair where Holloway once Saturday. She remembered every insult. Every sabotage. Every moment they tried to break her. And she realized something powerful: the greatest revenge was never becoming cruel like those who doubted her. It was becoming so exceptional that their doubt became irrelevant. That evening, Elena walked through the surgical floor as staff greeted her with respect. Nurses smiled. Residents straightened. Attendings nodded. The hospital no longer belonged to the people who protected hierarchy. It belonged to the people who earned it. She paused outside operating room 2, the same room where they once tried to sabotage her surgery. A young resident approached nervously. "Dr. Carter?" Elena turned. "Yes?" The resident swallowed. "I just wanted to say, you're the reason a lot of us believe hard work matters more than politics now." Elena looked at him for a moment, then smiled softly. "Make sure it stays that way." He nodded and walked off. Elena stood alone for a second, letting the silence settle around her. Then she looked through the glass at the operating room lights glowing beyond the doors and whispered the words she had carried from the beginning: "They said I was unqualified." A faint smile touched her lips. They were wrong. And if you enjoyed this story of power shift, surgical excellence, and proving every doubter wrong, be sure to subscribe, like the story, and comment where you're watching from. Because sometimes the best revenge is not getting even, it's rising so high your enemies are forced to look up.